Ah, there you are. I was beginning to worry you got lost in the Grand Library. Happens to most new recruits. Far too many corridors. Far too many secrets. Did you bring the book? Good. Give it here and sit down. We shall go over the Vargalean Empire today. Every new recruit must begin with what they think they know, because the truth is always more complicated than the stories. Legends will have you know that the Vargaleans came from Oshulia, from the coasts of Iriakar and the Piranesi Savannah, guided by a single star. Led by Prince Astaril, the brother of Lady Ilaria, the first Empress of Pyrenos, they were called the Alazar, or as some texts refer to them, the Unwanted. The tale goes that they refused to take part in the War of Dusk, and so Astaril led his people north, across the Sea of Grass, the sands the great Sultan now calls his home, and through the jagged cliffs of the Red Mountains, sparing them the pain of that terrible war. While it is mostly true that we Vargals share some ancestry with the Piranesi, it is far from the whole truth. The myth was right about only one thing, the time period of the migration. Once the Alazar arrived in Vargalea, they did not find empty land, but a thriving world of tribes that had lived here since time immemorial. The tribes of Vargalia were a proud and ancient people, stone carvers, hunters, and seafarers who had their own petty lords and customs long before the first banners of the Alazar were raised. And it was from these tribes that we inherited some of the very pillars that now hold our empire aloft, our faith in the 13 prophets, the god of life and death, the sacred custom we call knighthood, and many other traditions we claim as our own. And soon, the Alazar and the local tribes began to mix, blood, culture, and faith blending until neither could be told apart from the other. The clans lived a semi-nomadic life, moving from small fortress to small fortress, from village to village with the changing seasons. Their fortresses were humble, little more than stone walls and wooden halls, perched on cliffs and hills. But the Alazar brought with them the ways of Piranesi architecture, knowledge of fortification and stonework. Soon, these small fortresses grew stronger, and before long, the first true castles were raised. With stone rising from the hills and valleys, the world changed. Villages that once moved with the wind became permanent, and from the mud, towns and cities began to rise. But permanence brought new challenges. The growing settlements needed order, protection, and leadership. So feudalism was born, a system of loyalty and rule, forged by the chaos of the early days. Petty kings rose to power, ruling castles and towns, offering protection in exchange for fealty and labor. These petty kings ruled not by divine right, but by strength, cunning, and the loyalty of their swords. And from their thrones of stone, they laid the first foundation of what would one day become the Vargalean Empire. Not before long, the petty kings grew bolder. They carved new lordships and kingdoms from the land, warring endlessly for fields of grain and fertile valleys. Driven by ambition, they ventured further north, to the Shepherd's Mountains and beyond. It was there they discovered the old Salt Kings, the so-called Darag, a tiny, secretive people hiding beneath the mountains. The Darag burrowed deep beneath the stone, their cities ancient even then, their halls lined with carvings of forgotten kings and gods. But their time was already fading. Their kingdom stood on the edge of decline, shadows of what they once were. Further north, at the edge of the world, the early Vargals found something far worse. The Harkle raiders, the kings from the Isle of Vi. The Harkle awaited them on the cold shores of the Harkle Sea, their longships cutting through the mist like ghosts. They pillaged and burned the new settlements, leaving ruin in their wake. Both the Darag and the Harkle seemed to follow the same sea deity, the Maiden of the Waves, a cruel and capricious goddess who watched from the depths. And so, the Darag and the Harkle became the early Vargals' greatest enemies. The Harkle remain so to this day, ruling still from the cold Harkle Isles, their kings seated on the Isle of Vi, watching the mainland with hungry eyes. But the Darag were not so fortunate. They fell into deeper decline, their last kingdom crumbling into dust. Their great halls grew quiet, and their songs faded into the dark. Today, the Darag live a solitary life, herding sheep in the very mountains they once ruled. Their cities lie empty, their crowns lost, and they bow now to the might of the Vargalean emperor. And soon, a central power began to rise on the western shores of Vargalea by the Vargal Sea. At the mouth of the river Chain, a great city rose, Chainmouth, its stone walls towering over the riverbanks, with King Baldwin I at its head. Deep in the Vargal mainland, St. Archibald, now considered by the clergy as the fourth prophet, established the Church of Life and Death. It is said that St. Archibald was not a mere preacher, but a man of action. With an army of devoted knights, levies, and volunteers, he marched toward Chainmouth, not to wage war, but to kneel. In the great square of Chainmouth, beneath the eyes of the god of life and death, St. Archibald knelt before King Baldwin, and King Baldwin, in turn, bowed to the church. As legend has it, St. Archibald commanded a crown be made from the branches of an olive tree he passed on his journey. A simple thing, woven with care. He blessed it in the sight of the God of life and death and the prophets who came before him. And there, before the assembled lords and faithful, King Baldwin knelt again, this time to receive the olive crown upon his helm, a crown that gave him the right, along with the power of the church, to rule over all Vargals. And so, the first emperor was born. With the church's blessing, Emperor Baldwin's conquests came swiftly. His armies marched from Chainmouth, claiming castles and strongholds in the name of the empire, for it was his God-given right to rule. The Vargalean Empire had begun, and it would change the world forever. And thus began the 60 years of death, the bloodiest period in the history of the known world. Kingdoms fell in the shadow of Baldwin's banners. Castle after castle, land after land, the Vargalean Empire grew, at the cost of uncountable lives. And far to the south, the sands of Oshulia shifted. The Sultanate was born in blood and fire. Pyrenos, once the greatest empire in the world, crumbled, and old Aranir, wiped from existence by a fiery comet from the sky, was no more. Emperor Baldwin was 102 years old when he finally proclaimed the Vargalean Empire, with the Emperor and the Church as its twin pillars of power. His life's goal was achieved. All of Vargalea had been conquered, and after all the bloodshed, the realm prospered. Castles were rebuilt under imperial rule. Lords and ladies came to bow before their new emperor and his heirs, and in return, the emperor confirmed their right to rule their lands until the end of time. For almost 200 years, there was no uprising, no war, only peace and prosperity across the realm. The history of the empire, its wars with the Sultanate, the Northern Crusade, and the many rebellious lords who tried to defy the crown, we shall cover another time, dear pupil. Now go, get some rest, and put this book back where it belongs. I can see that you are tired.